Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 101, Basic Bureaucracy. Turns out I had to wait for far longer than I thought for the marshal to come to see me. 3 days longer. I'll be honest, after the first day I dumped the 2 corpses into a garbage bin far from us. The measly reward wasn't worth keeping the corpses around. I would tell the marshal about them, just so he knew they were dealt with. "Mornin', Paul," a voice from the side spoke. I had to push myself from under the truck to see who it was. I wasn't worried about someone sneaking up on me. Fiona was keeping watch from the top of the fortress. "Oh hey, Marshal. Give me a hand." The marshal held out his weathered hand and helped lever me off the ground. The marshal gestured with his head toward the truck. "Whatcha working on?" "Well, I figured it would make a good platform for your vehicle." "You here to talk about the diplomatic mission?" "About that? Oh boy, here we go. It's not all bad. The mayor and his council agreed to the mission." "I hear a but in there." "But," the marshal added, "they haven't come to a conclusion about paying you to create a vehicle. They want to do a cost-value assessment." "You're joking, right?" "Wish I were. It took them 2 days just to agree on utilizing your offered services." "Wait. That was 2 days ago? Why did it take you another 2 days to come to see me?" "That's the other problem. The man I wanted to send with you is missing. He and his team went out to collect a bounty and haven't returned yet." "You think they were killed?" "No. The man is cautious. I think their targets may have fled the area and he is still on their trail. The problem is the mayor wanted you to leave 2 days ago. I delayed it in hopes that he would return. Now we are kind of in a pickle." "Yet. Obviously, I'm not cut out for diplomacy, but, hear me out here. What about Martin?" The man rubbed his chin in thought. "That could work. The man does have a way about him that makes most people like him. Plus he is a high enough level that he can back up any claim he makes." "You think he will go for it?" "I don't see why not. It would do him good to get his thoughts off of what happened to his sister and instead work toward something productive. Here, have Martin read this over then. It's a list of what the mayor wants out of the talks and a list of concessions he is willing to give up to make this deal happen." I took the offered folder and glanced over the contents. I whistled when I saw what the mayor was offering. "He really does want this deal to happen." The marshal nodded, "That he does. Not that I don't trust Martin, but see that he understands the significance. I'll be on my way now, talk with you soon." I breathed a sigh of relief after the marshal was out of sight. I really hadn't wanted some random person in the fortress. The nervousness had festered over the past few days. So much so that I had just started building the vehicle for the marshal. When he told me the man couldn't make it, I nearly shouted in joy. I knew the feelings were irrational, but something about having a human I didn't fully trust, in my sanctuary, drove me to worry. It wasn't like that with the prisoner we had stuffed into the storage room. I think it had to do with the fact that I had full control of that situation. And it wasn't like I was going to lock some envoy away for the whole trip, that would make me look like an ass. Honestly, the vehicle behind me was 80% complete because of this irrational fear. But the work wasn't all that difficult. I simply slapped on my old plates from the house. The only thing left to do was add the control lines and a mana heart to power the whole thing. Seeing as the governing body of this fair town still had their heads up their asses, I was just going to go with Martin on this trip. It wasn't like the truck was going anywhere. Even if it did well, I wished the idiot that tried to steal it luck for the 0.5 seconds they would live before the entire thing exploded. If the truck was moved more than a few feet from the hidden rune circle in the pavement, the dwarven explosives would go off. And I knew just how effective those were from my time in Chicago. A "Don't Touch Me" sign was taped to both side windows as a precaution. Speaking of dwarven weapons, I still hadn't taken a look at those dwarven cannons we had acquired. From my experience with them, I knew that they were something similar to Martin's mana pistol, if only on a much larger scale. Wiping my hands off on a towel, I headed back to the fortress 100 meters away. No point in risking being too close in case the explosives accidentally went off. I waved to Fiona as I returned, not that I could see her, but I knew she was there all the same. She appeared next to me as I cycled the inner door. "What did the marshal want?" "Oh, he came by to give me some good news and some bad news." "Bad news is the mayor and his circle are still deliberating on if they want me to make them the vehicle. And the good news? That I don't have to fly some random stranger around." The marshal okayed Martin to act as their representative. and you think he will go for that?" she asked as the inner door clicked open. "I don't see why not. You know how he is with people. The man is like a honey trap for flies." "I guess we got caught as well," she said with a laugh. "Ha, as if," I winked. The house was quiet with only the two of us here. I breathed in the atmosphere, a welcoming bouquet of wet cats and sweaty men. Okay, so maybe not the most welcoming of smells, I admit. But something just spoke of home to me. I did open up the vents to cycle some fresh air in. I also made a note in my notebook to add more air scrubbers or just some air fresheners. "Can you tell Martin to take a look at this when he returns?" I asked, setting the folder on a table. Fiona, like me, opened it up to take a look inside. "Well, now, that is something. I'm sure Martin will be ecstatic for the chance to make this deal happen." I nodded. "I'm going to take a shower and fiddle with some crafting. If he has any questions, tell him to come to see me." "Sounds good. I'll be back outside," she added, slipping through the bomb chute. I did close it behind her, not wanting anything to crawl up from underneath the ship. Fiona would be more comfortable outside anyway. I didn't take a long shower, just enough to wash the sweat away. I was thankful that toiletries were not a high priority item when the world came to an end. There was plenty of soap and shampoo left in ransacked stores. TP was gone, but that could be purchased through the bazaar. Apparently, most species need to wipe their butts, who knew? After dressing, I went over to my work table and set one of the mana cannons on it. Like with the mana pistol, it didn't really resemble the Earth counterpart. For one, there was no barrel. It was just a 4-foot-long white rod about 6 inches in diameter. Originally it had been mounted to a rolling base that allowed aiming. I had disassembled this unit to inspect it. The rod was quite heavy, heavier than a steel chunk of the same size. I had no idea what material it was made from. The material had a chalky white coloring to it but was smooth to the touch. Delicate patterns of mithril adorned the outside of the piece, leading to a mana heart embedded into a small base of mithril at one end. It was obviously the power source. And while I didn't know exactly what the enchantments were, I was smart enough to know what they did. They focused and amplified the mana into a coherent beam of destruction. It was pretty cool, not gonna lie. I couldn't risk tampering with the device as it was much more powerful than the collars I had fiddled with in the past. That didn't mean I couldn't derive some ideas for a design of my own. I jotted down some notes and observations. A test would have to wait, no need to let the locals know our little flying rock was now heavily armed. Putting that project aside, I produced another project I had started. For now, I just called it the accelerator. It was an open tube about 10 inches wide with small plates angled in one direction. The whole thing sat on 3 legs that held it off the floor. It was a prototype and would probably fall apart with a few uses, but it was a proof of concept. Ever since dropping those bombs on the dwarves, I had realized that the levitator plates could be used for other purposes. The design turned out to be quite hard to produce and was finicky to operate. I turned on the device by feeding it a bit of power. Too much and it would float off the ground, not enough and well, nothing really happened. I figured out the sweet spot and listened to the device hum quietly. The copper wires feeding the plates weren't ideal, but they were enough for a prototype. No point wasting mithril on something like this. I took out a marble and dropped it into the inner circle, tracking its progress to the mat below. It got most of the way down before a misaligned plate sent it flying across the room. I sighed. I thought I had fixed that issue. This is why I tested this weak version. At least the marble speed increased this time. The first time I tested this, the marble actually slowed down, some weird interaction between the fields, halting it in place. I took the time to adjust the plate, using the fine adjustment screw I had added. My next test was a success as the marble thwacked hard into the mat. Testing larger objects didn't increase the speed, but they did hit with more force. I wrote down my observations and put the device away. It was a long way off from a functional weapon. Even just dropping a kinetic round below the fortress would be of little use. I had a lot of issues to iron out before I could make it launch a projectile horizontally. At the moment it wasn't more than something to kill time with. I switched over to my next project. I had run into a dead end on my body enhancement tattoos. Short of testing them on a live subject, I couldn't continue my work. I didn't throw that possibility out the window though. Plenty of criminals to use as test subjects. I just needed to make sure I wasn't empowering some psychopath. A knock came at my door before I could follow those thoughts for too long. "Come in," I replied, cleaning some of my experiments up. Martin opened the door. I saw he had the folder in one hand. So, what do you think? I think the fact that the mayor is willing to give up complete control of the bazaar to make this deal happen says a lot. But why did you want me to look this over? What, Fiona didn't tell you? No, of course she didn't, I stated flatly, rolling my eyes and picturing her chuckling about this. The marshal's man is off on a mission, but the mayor wants this done now. So, I kind of volunteered you to be the representative. Hey, me, but why? Let me ask you this. What is your charisma stat at? Martin had the tact to look sheepish before he replied. 17. I knew the man hadn't spent much in agility or endurance, but he must have not spent a whole lot in perception if he didn't notice how his high charisma affected the people around him. Hey, mine is 11. Haven't you noticed that everyone likes to be friends with you? No, wait, is this why you are friends with me? I shook my head. No, I believe a high enough intelligence or wisdom stat counteracts the effect of your high charisma. But even if that weren't the case, I doubt it's like mind control. More like people are ready to give you the benefit of the doubt. Plus I think you probably had a likable personality before the system, am I right? I mean, I guess I had a lot of friends growing up. But still, why me? Look Martin, all this moping about and self-doubt has got to stop. Yes, your sister died, and that sucks. But instead of wallowing in self-pity and what-ifs, don't deny it, I'm not blind, I said, stopping his argument. Instead focus on doing something positive. Don't turn into me. Would that be so bad? He mumbled. For you, yes, I said confidently. I knew I was a mess of a human being. But Martin didn't need to be brought down to my level, if anything his positivity helped pull me up toward his. Fine. I'll do it this one time. Good, we can leave as soon as Scar returns from his hunting and training, I said, clapping the man on the back. Chapter 102, Aggressive Diplomacy. It was early morning before Scar returned from his hunt. Not that I minded a good night's sleep. We were already underway, the invisibility field concealing us from the ground. We were floating along at a leisurely 20 miles an hour. There was no immediate rush to get there and I was curious about the area. I rolled out the rough map we had been given. It had been a state map but someone had scribbled on most of it with a Sharpie. The line of mountains that the dwarves lived in was marked as the spine and little triangles marking them at the edge. I noticed they ran mostly north with no real break. I wonder how far they go. The words hill country with a rough distance of 200 miles was marked. I assumed this information came from one of the marshal's men. A large area was marked off in the north, probably 100 miles from the base of the mountains as forest. It looked like the town we were headed to was 10 miles from the edge of the forest. Around where Tyler, Texas used to sit. It was now marked as the Hornwell Holding and it stretched from the mountain to the forest and easily 100 miles north to the edge of where Texas used to end. The words scribbled inside the map "not hostile" didn't give me a lot of faith. Spencer watched the trees from his concealed vantage point on the bluff. The elves had been quiet in the last few weeks and it made him nervous. Ever since one of the Holdings men cut down one of their stupid trees, they had been at war. No amount of trying to apologize or make amends had worked. The elves simply attacked and killed on sight. Spencer tightened the grip on his bow. He had earned the weapon after killing off one of the elves when they ambushed his group as they were scavenging the abandoned houses in the area. It hadn't been the first attack nor the last. Every few weeks an armed party of elves would ambush or attack anyone caught unawares. This had been going on for months now, with no end in sight. Carlson Hornwell had ordered the forest cut back and so it was. 2 miles of forest were leveled by spells or weapons. That also marked the largest confrontation with the elves to date. Over 100 elves engaged the defenders. 10 men fell that day to the damned elven archers. But the elves didn't get away unscathed. At least 15 elves died. The injured were treated and the attacks stopped for 2 whole weeks. That was rare. This was why Spencer was diligently looking for anything out of the ordinary. A flicker caught his attention and his raptor-like gaze zeroed in on where it had occurred. He had maxed out his perception when he hit level 15. It gave him a significant edge when it came to dealing with the crafty elves. One of his companions in the bunker walked up beside him after seeing his gaze locked on something. "You got movement?" the man asked. "I'm not sure." He continued to watch that area of sky as a cloud passed behind a slightly distorted area. "It's something and it's getting closer. Get ready to alert the garrison if it's the elves," he said, readying his bow and a skill called Lock On. The skill failed to activate though, as there was nothing to lock onto. Before he could activate another skill, a bolt of an iridescent green shot from the forest, impacting the flying object. Whatever spell was concealing the object shuddered and rippled. 3 more elven arrows hit the object. Shit, signal the garrison, he yelped. The elves were less than a mile from the edge of the forest. Whatever this object was, it had forced them to reveal themselves. Spencer watched as the 3 arrows impacted the object. His mouth dropped open as the enchantment concealing it dropped away, revealing an enormous floating rock. More arrows screeched out from the trees aimed at the strange thing, but a glittering field popped into existence, causing the attacks to be absorbed or deflected. What the hell was that? I yelped as the fortress rocked, causing my seatbelt to clench tight. You guys okay? Yeah, they replied. I adjusted the focus on the remote viewing device and saw the trails of more attacks heading our way. 3 more impacted the bottom of the fortress before I could switch off the stealth and activate the shield. We're under attack. Roll out the cannons. Martin and Ska unstrapped themselves and moved over to where I had molded in 2 cannons. They had limited side-to-side mobility, but they could pivot up or down a good 40 degrees. Thankfully Ska had those pre-filled mana hearts so he could transfer mana to the weapons. There wasn't any targeting system, so it was going to have to be the best guess. I'm rotating around to face the target. Try 25 degrees. I had marked a simple degree indicator on the walls next to the cannon's opening. All right, we are pointed in their general direction, fire when ready. I watched Martin fire off his shot. A white beam struck past the attackers, tearing up trees and sending a plume of dirt into the air. Go down 5 degrees, I said, watching the incoming attacks triple. Our shield was being hammered as it dropped below 3000. Ska's attack came next, hitting just shy. It seemed to be enough to pause the attacks before Martin's follow-up strike hit dead center. These weren't the only mana cannons I had mounted, they were just the closest to get to, being mounted to what we considered the front. We had to fire a few more times as a sporadic number of attacks came in, but they stopped as we moved out of range of the attackers. Ska could only fire 3 times. It took 2 of his charged crystals to power 1 shot and he only had 6. By the time the fighting had ended, our shield had dropped to nearly 2000. Some of that was just the cost of sustaining the field. The rest was from damage absorbed. Whoever had attacked us was serious. I'm glad I decided to take those mana cannons from the dwarves. Spencer watched the whole fight in a stupor. White beams had torn up large sections of the elven forest while the rock floated there unshakable as it returned blast after blast. The object hovered there for a minute, before it zipped overhead, making a beeline toward the town. Oh, shit. I wanted to be done with this forest, it had too many nasty possibilities. I jacked the speed up to the limit and zipped over the terrain with the shield still up. It would cost some power, but it was safer than trusting the apparently faulty invisibility screen. I set the fortress down well short of the town. I could see through the viewer that some anxious-looking humans were coming our way. I had also spotted a small walled compound near the edge of the forest. I imagined that was packed with fighters as well. The shield had to be powered off in order to land. Once on the ground, it could be brought online again, but it would not cover the bottom of the fortress. This was okay, I didn't plan to stay landed for long. And we're down, I said, quickly cycling down the power. I have to see what damage we sustained. You 3 may want to greet our guests. It can't ever be easy, can it? Martin sighed. If life was easy it would be no fun, I responded. Ska seemed to agree with me as he growled in confirmation. The 4 of us cycled through the doors and I extended the ramp, not waiting for it to touch down as I leaped off the fortress. While the others would meet with the locals, I quickly inspected the underside. It didn't take me long to find the first arrow, buried 5 inches into the hardened stone surface. Good lord, that attack had some oomph behind it. The levitation field would have reduced the weapon's impact and it still went that deep into rock. There was another issue, through that hole water dripped. I realized they must have pierced the water tank. I yanked the arrow out, letting the water drain. I couldn't be certain that the arrow wasn't poisoned, so better safe than sorry. I found the 3 other arrows, pulling them out as well. They were only in a few inches, still an impressive feat. I sealed up the holes, noticing one of the arrows had nicked a mithril control line. I followed the hidden line up the structure to see what it powered. While the lines were invisible to the naked eye, I could easily spot them with my tattoo active. I was more than glad I had added the rune to my body, it was turning out to be quite effective. My diagnostic led me to a side pusher plate. Good, this means I don't have to do a field repair. I sealed over the nicked line, leaving a small protuberance to mark its location. I could already see a dozen people heading our way from the town. Against my better judgment, I decided to stay outside with Martin and the others. The fortress would be safe enough. Carlson Hornwell brought up the rear of his retinue. He wasn't foolhardy enough to lead from the front. That being said, he also wasn't the type of person to let others shoulder all of the responsibility. Word of an attack had reached the town through the signal flares. Simple, yet effective US Army smoke canisters. He had thousands of the damn things after emptying the local army depot. It hadn't been his intention to carve out a chunk of Texas for himself, it just sort of happened after people came to him looking for safety. Then the survivors of any armed forces started to trickle his way. Then the elves came. At first, everything was fine. There was trade between the two groups. Then some dumb shit went and cut down one of their trees. If the elves hadn't killed the man, Carlson would have kicked him from his land. Now there was a war that seemed to have no end in sight. If that wasn't bad enough, some strange flying object had landed south of town. With no way to communicate with his people guarding the forest, he had to assume they were hostile. So he was a bit surprised when he spotted 3 people just standing outside what looked like a stone bunker, waiting for them. 2 were obviously human, but the third looked like a bipedal cat. He had seen stranger stuff since the world ended, so the sight didn't faze him much. The group stopped well shy of the outsiders. Carlson's second-in-command spoke. "Why have you invaded Hornwell property?" Carlson winced at the accusation. It wasn't the choice of words he would have used, but he didn't want to make his presence known until he understood why these people were here. One of the men stepped forward. He was tall with dirty blonde hair and a bit of a swagger. When he spoke there was a distinct Creole accent. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. We were sent here from Houston to propose an alliance." "And what the hell is that thing?" "Our transport," the man replied. Carlson spotted a group running from the direction of the garrison. He decided to put a stop to this charade before tensions flared. "James, let's move this conversation to some place more comfortable. Tell the garrison to leave 4 men to guard it. You will excuse us if we are a bit wary." "Not a problem. My name is Martin, and I assume you are Carlson Hornwell. If you don't mind, my friend Ska will be coming with," the man replied, gesturing to the cat. "That will be fine." Chapter 103, Negotiations begin. I watched as the groups left, Martin, Ska, and the invisible Fiona joining them. It was the safest they could be considering our circumstances. Seeing as there was nothing left to do, I turned toward the 4 soldiers. There were 3 men and 1 woman. I decided to use Identify on them. I had decided not to use it earlier in case anyone got upset at its use. While I had upgraded the skill, there was no telling if it was completely undetectable. Robert Astromancer level 12. Gordon Eagle Eye level 11. Anisha Necroecomancer 13. Tyrone Gideon Lancer level 12. All interesting class names. I figured Gordon's class probably gave him archery skills or something, considering the bow he held. As for the other 3, it wasn't entirely clear. "So anyone up for some cards?" I asked. The 4 looked at each other, but nobody responded. I sighed, tapping my foot and looking around in boredom. I don't remember having this little to do in such a long time. After an hour of standing around with the mutes, I decided to head back into the fortress. I could work on my projects if they were just going to stand around and stare at me all day. "Sir, you can't go in there," one of the men, Robert I thought his name was, stated flatly. "Sure I can, see. I'm walking up the ramp. And hey look, the door is opening for me. And what's this, I'm stepping inside." "Sir, please, kindly step outside and wait," the man added, getting grumpy. "Look, maybe you 4 like standing out in the Texas sun all day, but I don't. In fact, my fair northern skin is burning. So, I'm going to go to where it's nice and cool. Feel free to guard the entry ramp until I return." The man shouted something as he tried to run up the stairs and grab me, but the door slammed shut before he was halfway up. I just rolled my eyes and entered the inner door. I could hear the muted pounding on the door, but I ignored it. Instead, I got myself a cold beer from the fridge and a leftover sandwich. The label on the beer read after the end, a nod to the apocalypse. It was made by an enterprising man in Houston that the marshal had introduced me to. The drink was infinitely better than the skunky beer that was left over from pre-system Earth. But it was pricey and hard to come by. Good thing I had a ton of credits and I did the man a favor by capturing his ex-partner who had tried to run off with his recipe and fermentation supplies. Now I had 10 cases of the deliciously cold beverage. As I passed the control room, I glanced at the remote viewer, watching 2 of the men struggle to try and open the door without damaging anything. The other 2 were on the ground shaking their heads. I made my way up to my workroom. They would give up eventually. Just leave it be, Anisha called out to Robert and Tyrone. The 2 had been at it for 20 minutes with nothing to show for their efforts but a bruised ego. What do you think he is up to in there? Gordon asked. Who knows, probably taking a nap or some shit. If he wanted to leave or attack us he would have done so by now. You saw his level, right? No, too high for me to get a read on it. What was it? Too high for me as well, so above 18 at least. Also, he has a unique class that I haven't seen before, sounded like a caster class. Insight told me the 4 of us would have a very hard time taking him down. But not impossible, she added. What about your skills, anything? No, there is no dead plant matter for me to control within this odd ship, craft, bunker, or whatever you want to call it. Byron might be able to crack it open with his geomantic skills but he is patrolling the northern border. Should have just taken him up on his offer to play cards. Yup, Anisha replied. I fiddled with a football-sized representation of the fortress. It had been the prototype that I used to create the invisibility field and the shield. I was trying to figure out what I had done wrong. Sure, my all-seeing eye could pierce the enchantment but the range was limited to about 50 feet. No way could I have spotted it from 500 plus feet away. I disabled my tattoo and let the item float in place, walking around to see if I could spot it with my naked eye. There was nothing. I scratched my chin in thought. Maybe air resistance was heating the exterior causing the field to fluctuate. My staff appeared in my hand and the end lit with fire. I held it on one side of the object for a few minutes, then placed the staff back in my ring. I walked around again and observed the field. It was subtle but it was there. I didn't think that was the issue though. For one, we weren't going fast enough to heat the air to that high of a temperature. Perhaps the speed was causing some issue. I activated blink step, running around the object as fast as I could with the space available to me. Again, nothing out of the ordinary that I could spot. In frustration, I plopped into a couch at the far end of the room and just glared at the object. That's when I spotted something. It was subtle mainly due to the distance I was from the object. I quickly stood back up and grabbed the item, finding the longest open stretch inside the fortress. I set it about 2/3 of the way down the hall, then ran to the far end. When I turned around and looked, I had to slap myself on the forehead. How could I have missed this? The magical field caused a lensing effect, that's just what it did to render an object invisible. Problem was, that effect was distorted at distance. It was hard to see unless you were looking at the sky but it was easy enough to spot once you saw the effect. I was glad it didn't also act as a magnifying glass. I couldn't imagine the damage we would have done, simply by flying. With that mystery solved, I put the prototype away. I didn't think there was any way to fix this issue, not without completely tearing out the runes that caused the effect and replacing them with something different. That just wasn't feasible. We would just have to be aware of the limitations. A longer distance remote viewing device would help prevent us from encountering hostiles. We could also fly lower to limit the lensing effect. It was just a reminder that no magic was perfect. I may need to add armor plates to the bottom of the fortress. It shouldn't be too difficult. After cleaning up, I checked my watch. It had been a few hours. Either the negotiations were going great or were dragging on. I wasn't too worried, the 3 of them should be more than enough to escape if things got hairy. When I walked past the control center, to the kitchen, I saw that the 2 men had given up trying to open the outer door. I had to chuckle. The runes I added to the door were simple but highly effective. All they did was fuse the door to the wall, making it one solid unit. Then I added a rune that reduced the force applied to the surface and a rune that strengthened the entire structure. I hadn't been able to apply these runes to the whole fortress due to the way I ended up adding the levitation runes. I didn't regret that decision. Using the plates was nice for replaceability but they lacked the overall power that the large runic surface that covered the entire bottom. Not that anyone would know it was there, hidden as it was using the Odin rune. I decided to take a bit of a nap. It had been a long day. I was woken up an undetermined time later when I heard the door cycle. I got up from the couch just as the inner door cycled. The sounds of arguing coming from Martin and Ska. They demand too much, Ska growled. Well, they are in the position to demand whatever they like. It doesn't mean we have to give it to them. We just need to reach a consensus, Martin added. Still, they could show some concessions after 4 hours of discussion, Fiona stated. So, I'm taking it wasn't all roses and rainbows. No, Martin deflated. They are trying to rake us over the coals for everything they can get. They even demanded we remove all armaments from the fortress. Well, they can forget about that, I stated bluntly. Yet, I told them that you were a hired contractor and the fortress belonged to you. Still, they tried to demand that I talk you into selling them some of the weapons. I might be willing to part with some of the spares we couldn't mount. But I would need to bind them to an oath not to attack me or my allies with them. Martin perked up at this news. Really? I shrugged. I was planning on selling them anyway, might as well put them to use for a supposed alliance. That might make the talks tomorrow go a bit more smoothly. By the way, why were the guards outside so irate? I chuckled. Oh, they were peeved that I went inside and ignored them all day. Martin groaned. Please play nice with them tomorrow, my job is hard enough as it is. Yeah, sure, bud. For you, I will try, I said with a smile. Martin sighed. Why did I let you talk me into this, he said, heading toward the kitchen. I yelled after him, because, I'm awesome. His reply was to flip me the bird without turning around. I chuckled again, turning to Ska. So, you having fun? He just grumbled and walked off. Bunch of crabs today. They will get over it, Fiona said, slugging me in the shoulder, causing a wave of cold to radiate down my body. I rubbed the spot. Ow, what was that for? I think you know, she said, walking away to join the others in the kitchen. I rubbed the spot she punched me and smiled. Not that I wanted to see my friends suffer, but they had gotten to have fun and go dungeon diving for weeks while I worked on the fortress. It was about time I got to relax and enjoy myself while they had to do the hard part. We certainly had more to offer these people than Martin realized. The issue with their neighbors for one. Enchanted weapons for another. Heck, I could even make them their own pseudo-fortress, given the time and resources. Those things wouldn't come free, of course. And I would take steps to ensure they were used properly. It might actually indebt them to me. But that was enough postulating. I felt bad for teasing them, so I walked into the kitchen to apologize. When I got there, they were all trying to suppress grins to varying degrees of success. Oh, you jerks. You made the deal already, didn't you? More or less, Martin said with a grin. So why all the theatrics? It was Fiona's idea. She saw how you treated those guards, Martin's smile turning into a faked frown as he rubbed his fingers at me. Shame on you, you bully. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, okay. So what's left to do? Just a few details to hammer out. What about all this with the weapons, or was that part of your joke? No, they did ask about purchasing some. Mr. Hornwell will have someone come by tomorrow to negotiate a price. That's great news, we should be out by late tomorrow. Probably not, Martin cut in, spoiling my good mood. Mr. Hornwell wants to throw a feast to celebrate the alliance. I groaned at that news. Being in a room full of people I didn't know or trust did not sound like my idea of a good time. I would spend the entire night sizing people up and figuring out how to escape in case things went south. That sounds fun. You and Ska have a good time. I'm going to pass on going, I stated flatly before walking out of the room and heading upstairs, to the surprise of all three. Fiona found me a few minutes later. You need to go, she said. No, I don't. Is this about your trust issues? I didn't answer her, which was as much as an admission as answering was. That's fine, but do it for Martin. Celebrate your friend's victory. Or as you would probably phrase it, suck it up, Buttercup. She was right and I hated that. I sighed. Fine, I'll put up with it for Martin, but if it becomes too much, I may have to step out. She nodded in understanding, giving me a cold peck on the cheek. I noticed the cold didn't sting as much, or maybe I was just getting used to it. Chapter 104, I.O. The others left early the next day to finish the minutiae of diplomacy. Blah, I was thankful I didn't have to be involved. I did my time sitting through mind-numbing meetings when I worked in IT. After they left, I decided to make nice with the guards. I packed a table, some chairs, and a whole case of my beer into my ring, then I headed outside. I found the four from yesterday standing off to the side, quietly watching me. I walked down the ramp and approached them. When I was 10 feet away, I pulled the folding table out from my ring. It was a circular fake wood table, the kind you would find in a school cafeteria. Because that was exactly where Martin had sourced these items from. They even had the faded school markings on the bottom. Next came the folding chairs. Not the cheap ones either. These had decent padding on the top. I casually sat down at the chair facing them, dealing out cards in 5 places along with a set of plastic poker chips. I still didn't get any bites. I arched an eyebrow and reached into the center of the table. The tinkle of bottles clinking together rang through the morning air as I deposited the cold alcohol for all to see. It was the first sign of surprise and eagerness I had seen from the 4. I waited, tapping my cards on the table. The 4 looked at each other, then looked around. Slowly they each took a seat and a bottle of my finest. I smiled, if you can't win them over with kindness, do it with liquor. The game of Texas Hold'em went on for a few hours. The 5 of us burned through my entire stock of beer. Not that I was even mildly drunk. Sometimes having high endurance was kind of a pain. Surprisingly, Tyrone was the drunkest. I was surprised because he was 6'5" and looked like a linebacker. Anisha seemed to handle her liquor the best, able to easily keep up with me. The other 2 were definitely feeling it. I spotted people coming and quickly cleansed the inebriation from my poker companions. Everything else vanished into my ring, except the table, chairs, and cards. Tyrone seemed to be a bit surprised by being forcibly sobered up, but the others were quick to realize what I had done. They didn't get up, but they were more alert. As the new group approached, the 4 stood up to greet them. "Watch is over, we're here to relieve you," a dour-faced man said. The 4 simply nodded and headed back towards town. "So, you guys up for some cards?" The 3 behind the dour man seemed interested, but he just glared at me. "Guess not," I said, cleaning up the cards. I decided to play solitaire until my friends were done and came to get me. My watch said it was around 11 a.m. I hoped this was going to be a lunch feast and not a dinner one. I don't think I could take 6 hours of playing solitaire. After about an hour, a well-dressed man came walking from the town. He didn't look overly happy about having to walk through the grass to get to my location, but I didn't feel like parking on a road and there were no convenient parking lots large enough this far outside of the town. "Mr. Fuller, I presume," the man said, extending his hand to me. Call me Paul," I said, motioning for him to take a seat opposite me and not shaking his hand. Sure, it was rude, but who knew what types of magic there were? Better safe than sorry. "What can I do for you, Mr. Freeland?" I had to pause and use identify to get his name. The man didn't seem ruffled by my knowing his name. "Mr. Hornwell has sent me out here to negotiate the purchase of some weapons." My instincts told me that this guy had been some sort of lawyer before the world ended. He didn't have a class that added anything to it if he was, though. His class was analyst, and whatever he did, he made it to level 10. That was a respectable level for a non-combat class. "Yeah, Martin mentioned something about that. How many were you looking to purchase?" I asked, flipping over another card and sighing. "It might be better if you give us an idea of how many you have available to purchase, Paul," the man stated amicably, catching his faux pas. I chewed on his words for a bit. It could be an attempt to wheedle out how powerful I was. But if it was pretty transparent. Not that it mattered. I had 12 cannons installed in the fortress and 56 to sell. I wasn't going to offer all 56 to him, though. "I have 25 for sale." The man looked at a loss for words for a split second but recovered quickly. Good. We are willing to offer trade as well as credit. Do you have a price in mind?" I did actually price out the cannons while I was in Houston. Turns out they are impossible to purchase unless you were royalty or belonged to a dwarven clan. It's a good thing I hadn't tried to sell them while I was there. It probably would have resulted in some very nasty people coming to hunt me down, just to figure out where they came from. So, I put a conservative estimate of 4,000 credits per unit. While they were powerful items, they were rather basic in design. 4,000 credits per unit. If you purchase all 25, I'll drop the total to 80,000. A very generous offer, Paul. How about 65, 50 in credits and the rest in trade goods? I just shook my head and kept playing cards. Eventually, he relented. Would you consider 55,000 in credits and the rest in trade goods? What sort of trade goods? The man smiled, knowing he had me on the line now. He just had to reel me in. I kept my face placid, easily accomplished since I learned the skill while in slavery. It turns out they mostly had beef. Not just ordinary beef, but grass-fed Black Angus beef. It wasn't Wagyu, but I hadn't had a good cut of beef in years. Getting old and having to cut back pre-system sucked. I agreed to entertain the offer, as the lunch festivities would include a spread of the meat to sample. I followed the man. After packing up my table and chairs, we were heading for the house where the shindig would be held. The party wasn't so bad. Mr. Hornwell's house was large but not a mansion. He lived on a large ranch called the Hornwell Ranch. Yet, not very original, but whatever. I learned that Carlson Hornwell had raised cattle before the system. And while some of the creatures were irreparably changed due to the effects of mana, most were not. Even the ones that were, turned out to be far tastier. It was one of these that had been slaughtered for the feast. I didn't find out what it was called, but the head and horns were on display at the end of the table. The thing was massive, easily the size of an elephant, and the horns were enormous. At the base, they were wider than my torso. The end had to be cut off and was standing on the floor and brushing against the 10-foot-tall ceiling. I could easily sell those and would make sure that at least a few of the creatures were included in my deal. As I sipped on water and kept mostly to myself, I caught a flash from something in the kitchen. When I turned to look, I didn't see what had caught my attention until the door swung open again. My eyes fell on something I had never expected to see again. I was so surprised I just blurted out, "What's that doing here?" Mr. Freeland, who had been doggedly keeping me company the entire time, looked to where I was pointing. "You mean Io? We found her wandering near the mountains. A sad tale, that one. Have you ever met a Gargan?" At first, my anger kept me from responding. I thought she might have been a slave, or that these people had been the ones to wipe out her town. But from the sounds of it, that wasn't the case. How she managed to cross the massive mountain range was beyond me. "Hey, oh. We came across a town of them a month or so ago. Everyone was dead." Mr. Freeland nodded. "It matches up with what she told us. Around 4 months ago, a group of humans came to her village while she was out. They pretended to be friendly and then herded all the Gargans into a group, then slaughtered them. Then they went to the birthing factory, as she called it, and did the same to the remaining units as well as the progenitors. If she was out of the town, how does she know what happened?" Freeland tapped his temple. "She downloaded their memories. Would you like to meet her?" "Sure, I guess." I followed the man into the kitchen, where the Gargan was preparing food. It seemed odd. "Io, come say hi to our guest." The mechanical woman's head slicked up and rotated to look at us. It was a very mechanical motion. "Ah, Mr. Freeland, how are you this evening?" The not quite human-sounding voice came from where her mouth was situated, although there was no movement. She walked over, but her movements weren't fluid like Ska's, they were more sudden and deliberate. It reminded me of the robotic arms used in manufacturing. Even with the quick, deliberate movements, she easily weaved her way through the busy kitchen without hitting anything or anyone. "Io, this is Paul. He told me he came across your village." Her head jerked in my direction and I could see her mechanical eyes adjust and scan my features. "He was not with the men that terminated the others." No. "No," I coughed, "my friends and I came across your village only a month ago. Can you tell me what happened and how you got here?" "I was out collecting material. When I returned, they were all dead. After I interfaced with the dead, I learned that a group of progenitors had killed them." "Progenitors?" I asked in confusion. Mr. Freeland cleared his throat. "She means humans. Some off-world humans created the Gargans." "Mr. Freeland is correct," Io stated. "Were you able to learn who killed them?" "No, they gave no names, but I stored all of their faces for future reference." "Would you like to see?" "You can show me?" Yet, please do." Her eyes started flickering and light came out to form a floating image in front of her. I thought I recognized one of the men. "Did they say anything?" A recorded voice spilled from her mouth. "Stone says to finish up here and pile the bodies. We have to finish up in Chicago." Damn it, I did recognize one of the men. It was Jacob Moore, that prick that led me to Stone and the Stygian Order assholes. "Does that help?" Io asked. "Yes, thank you." "How did you get over the mountains?" "Simple, I climbed over." "Seems like a risk." "Very little. I don't eat, sleep, or drink. And the temperature doesn't affect me." "Okay, what about monsters?" "Plenty of those, none bothered me though." "Well, that must be nice." Thank you for your time, Io. She nodded quickly and returned to her workstation. Is something wrong, Paul? Freeland asked. I think I know who was responsible for killing off her people. Where they are now or why they did it is a mystery though. Well, if you ever come across them, perhaps do the world a favor and rid it of people like that. Oh, trust me, I will. Will you excuse me, I need some fresh air. I stepped outside. What were they up to? First, they killed off some random village in the middle of nowhere, full of sentient and seemingly harmless robotic humanoids. Then they popped up to Chicago to disrupt and destroy the Black Dragon. I also knew from questioning Michael, that they were in New York but had been handed their asses there. I tapped the railing on the porch as I thought. Whatever they were up to, I doubted it was anything good. No organization utilized that much secrecy if they were helping out. If I didn't have the looming threat of the Black Dragon hanging over my head, I would set out to root the order out first. But I didn't even know where to start looking for them. I would have to set out some feelers, see if I could make contacts, and keep my ears open when we visited more towns. Something was bound to come up eventually. Seeing as my mood was ruined, I decided to walk back to the ship. First, I thanked Mr. Freeland and agreed to his terms on the deal. He would come to pick up the weapons in the morning. Chapter 105, Unwanted Guardian. I had a lot of thinking to do as I left the others at the party and started walking back to the fortress. It was a good 5-mile walk, nothing I couldn't handle. I was well outside the city when I stumbled on a rock in the road. It was the only thing that saved my life as a bolt of white tore a chunk of scalp off as it flew past me. The pain spurred me into action, and before I even spun around I had my full suit of armor on and my staff in my hand. It was a good thing too, because another arrow impacted my helmet's shield, tearing away half the barrier. I recognized those fucking arrows. Come out, Jacob, you xenophobe. Another arrow appeared from nowhere and came at me, but I was ready this time. I swatted the offending projectile out of the air. Tisk, you should have minded your own business, Paul, the man said, appearing a good 40 yards away. How about you come over here and we can talk it over? Ha, funny as always, Paul. But I prefer to remain well out of range of your skills. He faded into the shadows again and I activated my tattoo. As soon as another arrow was fired, I activated Blink Step and the temporal skip ring I got from Obadiah so long ago. I crossed the distance in less than a second, my tattoo revealing Jacob as he tried to enter his shadow movement skill. My staff whipped through his body with all of the enchantments activated. The scream that greeted me was music to my ears. Activating the ring made it so I couldn't control my direction all that well, and before I could turn around and attack again, a portal opened and he fell through. It snapped shut as soon as he cleared the threshold. I had a brief glimpse of people on the other side, but nobody I recognized. My blood was pumping and I screamed at missing the opportunity for vengeance. Once I got that out of the way, I removed my helmet and cast Rejuvenate on the head wound I received. My entire armor was soaked in blood from just that short encounter. I decided to rush back to the Hornwell property and alert them of the situation. I highly doubted Jacob had come here to kill me. The only thing that made sense was that he came to finish the job with Io. Some guards must have heard my scream because they appeared long before I got to the house. What happened? One of them asked. I was attacked. I need to speak with Mr. Hornwell right away. I don't know if it was the fact that I was covered with blood or the sheer ferocity of my words, but the guards asked no more questions and escorted me directly to the house, where the party was still ongoing. I was asked to relinquish my weapon when I arrived. A prudent if useless measure. I handed it to the guard, who sagged under the weight. It was heavy for me, but I had trained with it. Mr. Hornwell, Mr. Freeland, Ska, and Martin all rushed out after they heard that I was attacked. Was it the elves? Hornwell demanded. No, it wasn't the fucking elves. It was one of those Stygian order fucks, I growled. That got blank looks and I realized I was probably one of the few people that knew what they were called. I reined in my temper before adding additional information. They are the people that attacked I/O's village. What? How did they get here? Why are they here? Hornwell asked, looking around. Everyone I have met from their order possessed stealth skills. They also have someone capable of creating portals. As for why they are here, my guess is to tidy up loose ends. Mr. Freeland turned white. Not Io, what could those bastards want with her? She has been nothing but a model citizen. I have no clue, all I know is they were here. Why did they try to kill you then? Mr. Hornwell asked accusingly. We have prior history and I don't think they appreciated me learning about what happened to I/O's village. Mr. Hornwell turned to one of his guards, double the guard around the house and put 2 guards on Io. Let her know what's happening as well. The guard saluted and rushed off to carry out his orders. Fuck, if it isn't bad enough that we have to deal with those goddamn elves, now we got assassins lurking about. Well, Mr. Expert, any ideas on how to combat this new problem? Why are you asking me? I stated flatly. Gee, I wonder, could it be because you just survived an attack from a foe that you yourself said utilize stealth skills? Yeah, well that was mostly luck and some innate abilities my class gives me. If you are willing to pay, I can enchant your doorways, making it impossible for anyone under stealth to enter through them. That is only going to deal with half the issue though. You will need to purchase teleportation scramblers from the bazaar to keep anyone from teleporting into the house. Damn it, and how much will that cost? To fuck over the Stygian order, I will do the work for free. You just need to cover the cost of the mana hearts. I have 6 that I can install and the range of the spell will cover about 25 feet from the source of the enchantment. The man ground his teeth but finally agreed. Freelan, get this man his money and show him the best spots to install these enchantments. I suppose they work like the cannons and have to be periodically charged. Yeah, but probably only once a week. They don't require much mana. Fine, fine, is our deal still on for the cannons? I rolled my eyes, yes, it's still on. Good, once you are done here, I will have a group of guards, along with Mr. Freelan, escort you back to your ship. You don't have any issue with them collecting the weapons at that time, do you, Mr. Fuller? Not so long as the payment is made in full, I said, using a towel I pulled from my ring to wipe some of the blood from my face. I realized I must look like a serial killer covered in blood like this. Hornwell grunted in approval and snapped his fingers. Everyone still present, my team excluded, snapped into action. I had to give the man credit, while he was gruff and blunt, he ran a tight ship. I followed Mr. Freelan around and he pointed out 6 locations to install the warding. It wasn't all doorways either. 2 were hallways that covered a significant portion of the floor. Anyone would have to pass through those halls to get to bedrooms or the downstairs living room. He also had me put one covering the stairs. The main entryway got one, the kitchen got one and the back door got the final one. All in all it covered most of the house and would make it a nightmare for anyone using stealth to get through undetected. I wasn't about to waste Mirthil on this guy's house. While a rune carved into the wood wouldn't be as effective, it would still outline a hazy figure. I started with the kitchen, carving the symbols into a light fixture that hung over a central island. I, of course, forced everyone to leave the areas I was working in. I inset the tiny gem and hid my work with the Odin rune. I filled the gem, activating the rune. A soft blue glow filled the space before being washed out by the light coming in from outside. It would be impossible to tell an enchantment was active unless you were paying very close attention. The rest of the work went quickly, most of the runes getting carved into wooden beams. Only the tiny gem gave away the position of the rune. So, how do we know these will work? Hornwell asked. Well, you must have a scout or someone with a skill to hide themselves, have them test it. Go fetch Barnaby, Hornwell ordered one of his guards. A few minutes later a lanky teenager was escorted down the stairs. He had similar facial features to Hornwell, so I figured he was a younger brother or a son. Barnaby, use that skill you used to sneak out of your room at night. The teen seemed to freeze at that revelation. Wait, you knew? Of course I knew, you aren't exactly quiet. Now be quick about it, boy. God, fine. Oh, teen angst, how I don't miss it. Hornwell was correct, whatever skill the boy possessed was not exactly quiet. It sounded like cracking glass as his body seemed to fracture and the light seemed to be reflected off a million facets. When the boy was fully invisible, his father had him walk through the areas where I had installed the runes. Sure enough, a blue silhouette appeared as soon as he stepped inside the area of the spell. Not exactly easy to spot, Hornwell grumped. It's the best I could do with the materials available. If you want to purchase 1,000 credits in Mithril, I can improve the resolution. No, this will have to do. Thanks. Io wished to express her thanks as well. I nodded. Since we are done here, let's go finish off the last of our business so I can be off. It didn't take long to conclude our arms deal. It was weird to think I had become an arms dealer. Well, I guess no more strange than magic or owning a flying fortress. We didn't take off right away, I had a splitting headache from the near-fatal head wound I had received less than 2 hours ago and was resting on a couch. I would have gone to my room and slept it off, but I needed to discuss events with the others. What about the Reaper title? Martin asked. Tried it, the location must be too far away. Not that I would know, I have no clue how far the ability reaches. Well, what about seeing if you can reach someone in Houston with it? I groaned and sat up, it was worth a shot. I decided not to use the skill on someone I liked. Not that the description said it had any effect, but the name Reaper didn't bode well for anyone involved. I picked one of the thugs we had apprehended alive. Most were rotting in prison cells, their skills unable to get them out. It took a considerable amount of time for me to focus my pounding head until I felt a tug at my mind. It was a strange sensation for your mind to start acting like a compass. So 300 kilometers was within the range of the ability. Next, I decided to see if I could pick up on the location of that Kurt fella. I knew for a fact that town was well over 500 kilometers away. It took a considerable amount more effort and all I got was a vague sense of direction. Still, it cut down the search area. That being said, where the fuck were the Stygian Order located if I didn't even garner an inkling of direction? I even tried locating their enigmatic leader stone, but got nothing. I guess the only thing I could do was use the skill every 500 or so kilometers and hope for the best. The other option was actively questioning people and seeing if I could narrow down the search. Since there was nothing that could be immediately done, we took off, heading back to Houston. I needed to finish up the vehicle for the marshal and decide on which direction to head in next. Chapter 106, The Hard Sell. We landed 6 hours later, back in our parking lot. My headache had finally decided to fuck off after a healthy dose of aspirin. It was the first time a wound had plagued me for so long and I wondered if it was some magical effect Jacob's arrows had. My HUD certainly didn't clue me in if it was, but that wouldn't be the first time the HUD let me down. Hell, for all I know it could have just been a concussion. But I didn't have accompanying nausea to go with it. I would take more care in the future, already planning on creating a self-defense amulet that could be worn incognito. The truck was unmolested, which was good, otherwise, the entire parking lot would have been a crater. Yet, I kind of went overboard with the explosives. As soon as morning came, Martin left to talk with the marshal and Ska went to go train his protege. I think she may have had a bit of a crush on Ska, but Ska seemed oblivious to it and I wasn't about to point it out or stick my nose in. Fiona stuck around if only to keep a lookout for trouble. If I was an insecure person, I may have interpreted this behavior as them wanting to be away from me. I may be an asshole, but I wasn't that self-absorbed. After I removed the explosives and arming runes from the truck, I went to go meet up with the marshal and Martin. I needed to hear if the mayor had made a decision yet. Not that I had any high hopes of that, even considering the fact that we were gone for over a week. In any case, I intended to bring up the topic of monocannons and see if he or the mayor might be interested in purchasing my remaining inventory. I found the two seated at an outdoor cafe a few buildings down from the headquarters. The building was closed, as the owners had either fled or were killed. But there was still plenty of coffee and one of the officers under the marshal was able to get the devices back online. "Care for a cup?" the marshal asked as I approached. I shook my head. I wasn't a fan of coffee. Neither the straight black kind nor the overly sweetened sugary shit that most people called coffee before the world came to a screeching halt. I enjoyed the smell of roasting beans, but somehow most coffee shops seemed to fuck that up most of the time, and all I ever smelled was burnt coffee beans. "Well, to each his own," the marshal said, sipping on the steaming mug in his hand. I don't know how he could drink that in the Texas heat. It had to be 80 degrees out already and it was only around 10 in the morning. Martin tells me the trip was a success, mostly. That reminded me, I needed to do the check and see if my title got a hit. Concentrating when not having a splitting headache was so much easier, and only a few seconds passed before I got nothing. It was good to know that the Stygian Order wasn't around here, at least the ones I was aware of. Yet, nothing you need to worry about. I didn't detect the known members around here. Not that I had extensive knowledge about known members of the Order. The marshal raised an eyebrow, which was expressive for him. "Be that as it may, we will still keep an eye out for any shady folks around." I nodded, deciding to change the subject. "Any word about the funding?" "Yes, the mayor has agreed to fund 2 vehicles. You will need to talk to his clerk at City Hall to procure the funds though." I groaned internally at having to deal with a paper pusher even after the world ended. "Fair enough, I will seek them out later today. Any other news?" Martin and the marshal shared a look. The marshal downed the last of his coffee and stood up. Nothing new on my end and I have to get back to work. I'm sure I will see the two of you around, the man said, giving me a small nod before he hustled off. That was weird. Any idea what that was about? Yes, Martin said with a sigh. The marshal was giving me an opening to bring up this next topic. Oh boy, the way Martin was talking it was like he needed to tell me my girlfriend cheated on me or a close family member died. It made me extremely uncomfortable. I have decided to accept the position of diplomat that the mayor and the marshal have offered me. I breathed a sigh of relief. That's great news. The thing is I can't be both a diplomat and fly around with you. Oh, shit, he was right. Ever since my sister died, I just didn't have any drive. Leveling was great and all, when I had a goal, but losing her ripped that away from me. I know it's stupid, I left her behind even before that. But it made me realize the killing, the revenge, none of it filled the hole left behind by my dead wife. Brokering this deal was the most rewarding experience I have felt since that night I found out she was gone. Everything between that and now has been me trying to find my place. Don't get me wrong, traveling with you and the others was a blast. I know it was your intention just to get me out of my funk and it worked, maybe a bit too well, he added with a sad smile. I listened to Martin talk without interruption. While it stung that he was leaving the group, I couldn't hold him back. He found something in life that made him happy. I couldn't take that away or hate him for that. Besides, I still had my own demons to squash. But, Martin said, if and when you go after the Black Dragon, don't forget your friends. I will always back you up, even if I am underleveled. I could only nod at the man, my tears both happy and sad had long since dried up. I could feel the emotions but it's like they were disconnected from my body. So where is a globetrotter like you off to next? I asked. Supposedly there is a large group of survivors near Austin. But that will have to wait until you finish my new ride, Martin said with a smirk. I chuckled, fair enough. Want to go with me to pick up the money and last of the components? Sure, why not? I also need to stop by and say my farewell to the others. I nodded and we headed toward the town. Ska is going to be pissed that you won't be cooking for us anymore. That got a chuckle out of the man, you may be surprised. He is a quick study and has been helping with meals for a few weeks now. Well, surprises never cease. I wonder if this has anything to do with his new female friend. Martin shrugged, hard to say, it does seem he likes her quite a bit. But I don't want to think too hard about the specifics of that situation. Probably for the best, I replied. We arrived at the clerk's office an hour or so later. The guards had been slow to let us in, waiting for verification from the marshal's office. Once that was done we had to wander through the packed streets to get to the governmental sector. The people in the town were packed in like sardines. How anyone could live like this was beyond me. I knew that it was a temporary situation until a new wall could be erected farther out, but still. Once at the office, we had to wait, again. It was no surprise seeing the number of people coming and going from what was a converted DMV building. They may not have electricity but bureaucracy still worked fine with pencil and paper apparently. I was forced to fill out a blocky form, that looked like it came from an old wooden paper press, and for all I knew it had first name, last name, class, reason for visit, blah, blah, blah. I gave them my name and reason for the visit if they didn't like it, tough shit. I walked up to the teller and handed her my sheet. She looked it over with a frown. Mr. Fuller, you left some fields blank. Yup, I replied flippantly. But you can see the important one is my reason for visiting. She gave a tired sigh and stamped the sheet, sliding it off into a pile. Very well, please take a seat and I will let the clerk know you are here. I nodded as politely as I could and went to join Martin in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, scattered about the room. 10 minutes later a skinny man of middling height came over to us. Mr. Fuller, Mr. Lacroix, please, come with me. Wait, your last name is Lacroix. What, you never saw it with identify? Martin asked quizzically. I turned last names off for a while, then back on, then I fiddled with the setting to only show last names of people if I knew them or their last name. And you never bothered to try using identify on me since? Nope. Seems like an odd choice, Martin added. It is, but it actually comes in handy. I can identify people I have run into in the past without recognizing them. It's how I recognized that Black Dragon guy in that raid. Well, I guess whatever works. We continued our conversation as we walked behind the clerk. I didn't bother using identify on him, I just didn't care enough to know who he was. We weren't in the office long, the clerk verified my identity, made me sign a contract of work, and handed me the funds I needed to complete the vehicles. A cool 6,000 credits. Not that I needed it, my personal wealth was almost 60,000 credits at the moment and I still had all the meat from my Hornwell deal in the fortress. I had some with me to sell at the bazaar but there was a lot of meat. We walked to the bazaar since I left Bella to roam around the fortress. Fiona was keeping an eye on her but Bella was smart enough to stay out of trouble, or at least end it quickly. I did leave her saddle on though, so nobody would mistake her for a roaming monster. In the bazaar, I purchased a few things. Mana hearts and mithril as I needed those to complete the vehicles. But I had been thinking about my encounter with Jacob. I wasn't immortal and second chance only went so far. So I purchased a few gold rings with tiny mana heart fragments inset into them. As they were only pretty baubles, capable of storing 50 mana. Then I purchased a pendant made from spun mithril and gold. It was pricey but should work for what I had in mind. I also added a fancy-looking bracer with gold and mithril inlay. That would be for Ska. I ended up spending less than 10,000 credits by the time I was done. A normal person would probably think I was crazy as I considered that a small amount. I didn't even bother purchasing unenchanted weapons to top off my supply. I did sell a full ring of meat to a vendor for 2,000. It was less than I expected to get but I was tired of walking around the bazaar and wanted to get to work. It took Martin and me much less time to walk back to the fortress, the guards didn't care who left the walled city, only who entered it. While I got to work finishing up the first truck, Martin talked with Fiona about his plans and the fact that he was leaving. Fiona was devastated and she flew off to cry. I knew the two had become close, I guess I didn't realize how close. My heart ached for them as they couldn't be together. I wasn't mad at either of them. Sure, Fiona and I had a moment of passion but that was brought on by extenuating circumstances. And now that she had died, she had been freed of that commitment to me, well except the fact that she was my spectral companion. It was crazy to think that her fate was somehow tied to mine. I thought of her more as a confidant and friend than in any romantic way. Not that I even had sexual urges anymore. I couldn't even lament the loss of my libido. It allowed me clarity of focus that others would be hard-pressed to beat. Sure, I cared for my friends and I would give my life for them if I had to. But I would also not hesitate to kill off an entire city if it meant getting revenge on those that wronged me or my friends. Few could say they would go that far. Even fewer had already done so. Chapter 107, Parting Words. Martin stuck around until the next morning, saying goodbye to Ska and apologizing to Fiona. Ska was confused as it was anathema for a Grimalkin to leave its tribe. We explained that he wasn't leaving our tribe, he was joining a bigger one. It didn't seem to help and he grew agitated and left to go hunt. Fiona had recovered from her emotional outburst and only gave Martin a sad smile as he waved us off. You know we will see him again, I said quietly. You're not mad. Why would I be? Two of my best friends found solace in one another, nothing to be mad about. But what about us? I sighed, that is in the past. I still care for you but more like a sister than a lover. She smiled sadly, giving me a light pat on the shoulder. I ignored the cold that seeped into my body and wished I could hug her to lessen the pain she felt. What about Ska? He will be back, it's not like we are leaving right this minute anyway. If you don't mind I am going to go be alone for a bit. I nodded, watching Fiona float off quietly. I sighed again and headed toward the vehicle. I had work to do, and sitting here wallowing in my feelings wasn't going to accomplish anything. Knowing the vehicle was for Martin, I decided to do a bit extra as a going-away gift. I installed the power crystal inside the glove box, after reinforcing it with runes. It also would meld with its surrounding, like the door to my fortress, so only someone with the tattoo or linked key could open it. I then reinforced the entire outside of the truck, the same way I had the fortress. It wouldn't make it impenetrable but it was orders of magnitude stronger now. If I had to guess it would be comparable to a heavily armored tank. Not that it would protect against magic. I couldn't shield or cloak the vehicle, there just wasn't the budget for that. Even if I spent my own credits, a shield wouldn't be nearly as effective as it was on my fortress. The shape was just too odd and I noticed that shields worked best as a dome. Plus you couldn't activate it while driving around. Similar to how I built the bus, I left in the ability to drive. Unlike the bus, it could also fly. Not very high though, maybe 50 feet off the ground. It should be quicker than my fortress, but it only had plates on the tailgate to push it forward and one in the grill to stop it. All in all, it was much more mana efficient to just drive it around. I decided to take my newest invention for a test drive. It bounced a bit more than a normal truck while I drove on the desolate outskirts of Houston. Probably because I had removed the engine and transmission. It still had power steering and AC though, thanks to a mana engine stuffed into the now empty engine compartment. I was actually thankful for electric power steering, it made hooking it up a breeze. Everything was tied into a charging circuit built into the steering wheel, thin filaments of mithril the only thing that gave away their presence. The speedometer didn't work anymore as there wasn't a transmission, but who cared? Not like a cop was going to pull you over for going too fast. Speaking of, I mashed the accelerator and tore down the old highway, swerving around broken down and long abandoned vehicles. I launched off the broken end of the elevated freeway and for a second enjoyed the feeling of freefall before I adjusted the levitators and zoomed off into the distance, just above the houses and buildings. I returned an hour later, happy with the test. Even with the smaller mana heart, the truck could remain airborne for a good 3 hours. It was better than my fortress. Martin should have no issue providing mana to the control crystal, even someone half his level could keep the truck powered for 10 or more hours. I set the truck down in the parking lot, bouncing on the suspension. The landing was a bit rough as the flight control wasn't as fine as the fortress. I would let Martin know to ease it on and off. I powered off the vehicle and secured it, sticking the 2 control keys in my ring. Martin didn't need one, but I figured a few backups couldn't hurt. While flying, I also located the perfect vehicle for my second conversion. The mayor wanted something capable of ferrying 5 to 10 people. A bus would work, but they were so bulky. Instead, I came across one of those large conversion vans. I hopped on Bella and we rode across town to the dealership where I had spotted it. As far as I knew, this part of the town was abandoned, just too much open space to wall off. That didn't mean there weren't survivors or desperate people in the area though, so I kept my eyes open. As I rode past an alley, I spooked 3 people and they ran off in different directions. Well, I probably didn't spook them, but a mini T-Rex named Bella might have. She snorted and cawed at the people as they fled, but we moved on. She let out a low hiss as we neared an intersection and I pulled to a stop. I was wearing my armor so I didn't fear a surprise attack, but I couldn't see what had her hackles up. She let out a few chirping caws and in response got a deep angry growl in return. In an alley behind a gas station, a large lumbering beast came out. It was followed by the screech of metal as its enormous spines tore chunks out of the walls. It was a porcupine the size of an elephant. Bella chuffed angrily and I had to hold her back. The creature puffed itself up, the spines penetrating walls and concrete as easily as soft clay. Its beady red eyes blazed in hatred as it turned toward us. Well, that's not something you see every day. The creature was a good 100 feet away and I didn't feel like dealing with it today. Plus it looked like it was just defending its territory as it wasn't approaching us. I pulled Bella around, keeping my eye on the creature as we backtracked and went in another direction. It watched us but seemed content that we left. It would have been nice to know what it was, but I didn't feel it was worth a closer look, not with those sharp spines. Maybe I would send Fiona over to ID it. We made it to our destination after another 20 minutes. I wasn't in a hurry, so we were taking it slow through the unfamiliar streets. The car dealership sold all kinds of work vehicles, but I went around until I located a van with 3 rows of back seats. Crammed in, it could seat 11 people. Perfect for what I needed. The place even had a shop attached. I scouted the area around to make sure nobody was near before I got to work. I pushed the van into one of the bays, this one having an in-floor service area for oil changes. I cut out the engine and transmission, letting them clatter to the bottom with a racket. Then I removed the rest of the junk I didn't need. With the tools in the shop and the easy access to the bottom of the van, it only took me 2 hours to attach all the plates, install the control lines, and add the mana engine. I had prepped everything before coming and the plates were the last remnants from the old house. Bella was keeping an eye out for any trouble. It seemed like anyone that was still surviving out here was smart enough to stay away. I reinforced the outside of the van the same way I did with the truck. I guess I didn't want them thinking I skimped out. That part took me 5 hours, mostly because the van was much larger than the truck. Once finished, I stuck Bella back in her enclosure and hopped into the van. I always wanted to do this, I said with a smile, stepping on the accelerator and a few seconds later, bursting through the thin garage door with a bang. The van was unhurt as I barreled down the road back towards home. It's a razor-spine dire porcupine, Fiona said, and it's level 14. Good to know. I will notify the marshal, maybe he has some men that can take care of it. Fiona was still hiding her presence from any outsiders. It was probably for the best, we didn't need a repeat of the Psion incident. I thanked her for the information and got back to my delicate work. The rings had been the most time-consuming product I had made, except for the fortress. I knew it would be difficult, but I didn't realize how hard it would be to fit the runic design I had come up with on the rings. I had my jewelry loop and one of my most delicate inscribers. A tool that you fed a trickle of mana and it acted like a mini laser, vaporizing a minuscule portion of the metal. The issue wasn't my control but the number of runes and patterns I had to inscribe. The pattern I came up with had 10 runic symbols and 3 separate functions, all to trigger one effect. Plus I was making 2 of the damn things. I finished the first ring, inspecting my workmanship quickly before the runes faded. I then used inspect on the ring. Bounce back. Quality, good. Description, a single-use ring crafted by an intermediate crafter. Converts the stored mana into hit points after death. Bound to Paul Fuller. Both rings were completely useless for anyone else and they were single-use to boot. The tiny mana hearts contained in the gaudy rings only stored 50 mana. The conversion rate to HP was 5:1, giving me 10 additional health after my second chance kicked in. Testing the theory was not my favorite memory and I told Fiona to never mention it to anyone. I would have made one for Ska but his paws didn't hold rings so well. I was making him a bracer but it wasn't the same enchantment. Not that I didn't want to, but every time I had created the stupid runic design it would say it was bound to me. It seemed to be some limitation on this specific effect. An extra 20 health in the grand scheme of things wasn't much, but it could give me time to activate a healing spell or inject a much needed health potion. Once those were finished, I moved on to the bracer and the pendant. It was another design I had been tinkering with. Having a rechargeable shield was nice but it could only ever cover the armor it was inscribed on. So you needed a chest piece, helmet, pants, and boots to close off most of the vulnerable areas. That was if you wanted to move around. A static shield could form a dome but you would be stuck at that location unless you powered down the shield. The vulnerabilities weren't an issue when wearing full kit but that just sucked. Plus it wouldn't help Ska at all, considering his meager armor. So, I came up with a runic combination that spread the impact of one attack across the entire body. It was also not a pleasant test. And when I say body, I mean the whole body. It felt like every nerve was rubbed raw. While not truly painful, it was debilitating the first time I experienced its effect. With some practice, I managed to weather the effect without being debilitated. The whole point of the item was to defend against sneak attacks. I didn't know what effect it would have on magical attacks though, so I added runes to reduce magical damage as well. It wouldn't do to have a fireball hit me unaware, on my pinky, only for my necklace to decide my entire body should feel the burn. The necklace would recharge after a few hours after absorbing most attacks. But I suspected higher tier spells or spells that covered an area might burn out the enchantment, rendering the item useless. If it worked to save my life, then money well spent. Ska's bracer would perform the same function. Necklace of Unbroken Pain. Quality, good. Description, this necklace redirects the force of one attack to the whole body. 60% magic resistance. Ooh, can you feel it? I'll be honest, I was a bit creeped out by the description, even though I knew what it did. The bracer wasn't much better. Bracer of Nettles. Quality, good. Description, this bracer redirects the force of one attack to the whole body. 60% magic resistance. Yet I can feel it. I knew that the system incorporated the crafter's state of mind when it named these things, but really? Was I that worried about the effect? After thinking about it, yeah, it really did suck. Thankfully I had put Ska through the same rigorous testing as I had gone through. He hid from me for days after that. Even so, he would now be protected as well as I. Chapter 108, Unexpected Enemy. We were getting ready to head out, the fortress was restocked and Martin had moved most of his items out. He was always welcome, so the room would remain his anytime he wished to visit or join us on a trip. I was finishing up my preparations when I heard a knock at the door. After checking the camera I noticed it was that hunter girl, the one Ska was training. I unlocked the door to see what she wanted. She let out a squeak of surprise. Is Ska here? Yeah, but we were planning on leaving soon, can this wait until we return? It shouldn't take long, she said, fidgeting and not making eye contact with me. I sighed, fine, I'll go get him, wait here, I added, closing the door. I went to Ska's room. He had been acting weird since we returned. I chalked it up to Martin leaving, but maybe he had a falling out with his woman friend. I sighed again, it wasn't any of my business. Ska, your hunter friend is here. Oh. He said, sounding lethargic. I will go meet with her. He got up and headed to the front door and I frowned in concern. I watched the two walk off as the girl kept glancing back toward me. Something wasn't right with my friend. Fiona, I think something might be up with Ska. You want me to follow them? Yeah, and I will follow behind you. I didn't want to tip the huntress off that we were following them or make Ska think I didn't trust him, so I stayed well back. Fiona would remain undetected. It was obvious after a few turns that the huntress was attempting to lose any possible tail, so I moved to the rooftops. The longer I followed, the more certain I became that something was off. I could see the young woman leading Ska around like a dazed child, looking none too concerned as she pulled him along. I wanted to put a stop to it right then and there, but I didn't want to involve myself unless necessary. Fiona appeared next to me a few minutes later. I'm not able to follow her anymore, there is some sort of magical interference that is obscuring my vision. Shit, alright, go back and see if you can find Martin and lead him over here. I will try to follow them. How will he find you? Well, if Ska is in trouble, have him follow the ruckus. She nodded and quickly flew off. I launched into the air and quickly flew in the last direction I had seen the pair. I spotted Ska's tail as he was led around another corner. He was a few blocks away and I had to multicast my wings to catch up. The sun was setting, so the sky was dark enough to hide my location. We were entering an industrial section of town and I finally spotted the two. I hunkered down on the roof and watched. This woman hadn't done anything too concerning, yet. And I couldn't go around murdering people just because I was suspicious. At least not in this town. She gave one more look around before pushing Ska into a warehouse. From my position, I could see the warehouse had missing panels on the roof, so I flew over and landed quietly, and slowly moved to one of the openings. It was clear something was going on in the warehouse as there was a group of people inside, other than the young hunter and Ska. You said the compulsion would hold. Feline raged, slamming her foot down like some petulant child. Miss Rose will, I said it should hold, but he is a strong specimen. With his level being higher than mine, I can't guarantee it to be completely successful. If you had kept him by your side the whole time, it would have stuck. I told you I couldn't do that yet, his friends would have become suspicious. I can't wait any longer, I want him to be completely mine, she glared, stroking the soft fur of the Grimalkin and sighing contentedly. Now fix your goddamn mistake or I will get my father involved. No need for that, the unknown woman said, raising her hands to wave off the angry woman. She snapped her fingers and a zombie-like Ska walked forward into a chalk circle. I had seen enough. I dropped through the opening, my armor and weapon appearing as I fell. My appearance didn't go unnoticed as the three men standing off to the side yelled. Feline froze up as she spotted me. That shock didn't last long as she tried to bolt from the building. I wasn't about to let her get away though, so I used beacon. It was like a switch was flipped as everyone, including the girl and Ska, came rushing at me with unadulterated hatred in their eyes. In hindsight, I shouldn't have used the skill until I knew what was going on with Ska. I wasn't too worried about taking on the rest of these people, but I had been personally training Ska and he was getting dangerous to fight. I cast Rejuvenate on Ska, knowing he would need the healing most since I was going to have to be less than gentle with him. I hadn't had time to imbue my staff and doubted I would need it. A quick identify told me the highest leveled adversary was 14. A respectable level for someone around this area. The woman that had been luring Ska had a class called Thrall Mistress. The three thugs were your garden variety, melee classes, and only level 9. I didn't want Feline to slip away during the ensuing fight, so I smashed a shockwave into her leg. There was an audible snapping sound as she went down with a scream. Disruption was enough to injure the rest, all except Ska, who was nimble enough to avoid the attack. His claws raked across my shield, nearly depleting the stored mana before I was able to throw him off. I hit him with Banshee's Wail, stunning him and causing his ears to bleed. I felt bad for having to do that, but it would keep him trapped until I dealt with the others, or so I thought. As I turned back toward the woman and her thralls, I was tackled from behind by an angry Grimalkin. He tore at the armor on my back as I tried to shake him off of me. I had forgotten he was wearing the bracer I made for him, at least it worked. The magic resistance must have been enough to negate the stun. I tried to elbow Ska in the nose or flip around so I could kick him off of me. This whole time the others were recovering and already one of the thralls was rushing at me with a blade that looked like a meat cleaver, only longer. I was forced to activate Area of Denial, flinging the angry cat across the room and into the wall. I launched to my feet, retracting my staff into its mace configuration. The man's cleaver slid harmlessly off my shield as I backhanded him across the side of the head with my weapon. I had enough of this bullshit. I cast Blink Step and Flurry as I raced toward the recovering thrall mistress. Her eyes went wide as she cast a shielding spell, but I released all of my anger as I pushed my staff forward. The extra force from switching it back to a staff impacted her shield with a boom that blasted out all of the windows in the building and sent her hurtling through the warehouse until she slammed into a pole. She had survived, but I wasn't done. She had harmed a friend and ally, and there was no outcome that didn't end in her death. I stalked toward her as she coughed up blood, trying to stand. She produced a gun from a storage ring and tried to fire it at me, but she missed every shot. Every step closer was another nail in her coffin. As she pleaded for her life, my staff descended on her head, cracking it like a watermelon. No mercy for those who harm my friends, I growled. My sanity returned as the blood dripped from my staff. I heard moaning behind me, so I looked around. It turns out the 3 men had fallen to the ground after I must have broken their enthrallment. I turned to see where Feline was, but I only spotted a bloody trail that led out the door. I followed the trail and found Feline face to face with an enraged Ska. I always forgot how fast he was, beating even me outside. How could you use me like that? After everything I did to help you out, this is how you chose to repay me, he said in a menacing growl that I had never heard him use before. I only wanted you to be mine, she wailed pitifully. Please, let me live, my father is very powerful, you wouldn't want to anger him, she added, as Ska closed on her. Ska continued stalking toward her and she raised her hands, please end here. Ska's strike was lightning fast as he tore out her throat. A wet slap of blood hit the pavement. He walked past her and toward me as she flopped over and bled out on the ground. Thank you for saving me, she had taken me to meet her friend on our first outing and she befuddled my mind. She made me do things that I didn't want to do. My mind wasn't strong enough to break free, until we left for the north. I could feel my mind coming back, but I was still confused. I think she knew, that's why she was so adamant to enthrall me again. I clasped Ska on the shoulder, it's okay man, we're friends and I know you would do the same to help me. Let's go check on the other victims, we might need their testimony to help clear our names. I chose not to ask what things she made Ska do. I could tell by the woman's infatuation and what I witnessed of their encounters, that it was probably not benign in nature. 2 of the men were recovering, the third seemed to be unconscious from my attack, so I cast a healing touch on him. The 3 recounted the story of how they had been lured into the grasp of the woman I killed and thanked me for helping to free them. The 5 of us headed toward the marshal's building to report on what happened here. We were met halfway by Martin and a group of 3 officers. I just exited the marshal's office after giving him my report. They had found the 2 dead women. Apparently, Feline was the second daughter of an influential Texas businessman, one that had survived the apocalypse and set up shop in a gated affluent Houston neighborhood. I remembered the marshal talking about this area. It wasn't allied with anyone as the people had enough wealth and power to create their own little community. But they weren't antagonistic either. The marshal told me that I may want to lay low or skip town for a few months to let tensions die down. It was unlikely that this man would take kindly to his daughter being killed, even if it was her fault. I agreed with the marshal, not that I feared some puffed-up windbag that hid behind his walls and soldiers. But best not to start a turf war. If the man decided to come after Ska or me, I would deal with it then. Speaking of Ska, he was getting back to his normal self. Sometimes I envied the Grimalkin. Their existence was so much simpler than humans. Then again, sometimes I didn't envy them. Betrayal of one's own was a foreign concept to the kiddies because of their shared mental state. Ejecting Ska from their clan wasn't even seen as betrayal, not from Ska's point of view or the ones that remained behind. It just was how things were done when one threatened the whole of the tribe. I had asked Ska if he hated them. Why would I hate them, he replied. I failed as a warrior and as a protector, it was only sensible that they would cut me out. I was distraught at the time, but never did those feelings pass on to my fellow tribe. You cannot leave a disease to fester amongst the healthy individuals. It was far more rational than I would be in his situation. We finished the preparations and set off to leave. I decided to fly us north along the mountains to see how far they went or if there was a pass to the other side. I know none of the marshal's men or Mr. Hornwell's had found one yet, but they hadn't ranged far past the old border of Texas. Chapter 109, What Lay Beyond. We were on the third day of our impromptu journey. I didn't have any real goal in mind other than scouting and maybe finding some decent dungeons to loot. So far we had just passed the edge of Texas. A Hornwell outpost marked the border in the distance. I had spotted his flag with the remote viewer. I could even see a few people moving around the small structure, keeping an eye out for trouble. They never once looked our way. The cloak was up and I was flying lower along the mountain. It really did reduce the lensing effect dramatically. Our flight continued north for another full day before anything changed. The mountain was still as stalwart as ever, rising up to touch the clouds in the east. What should have turned into mostly farmland and flat terrain in the west instead became low rolling hills marked with small groves of some odd tree. Definitely not a native tree of earth. The wood was a strawberry red color and the leaves looked like they were dipped in blood. The fact that they dripped occasionally in the heat of the day added to the effect. The trees seemed to house any number of wildlife, so I had to assume they were benign in nature, at least to that wildlife. I assumed what dripped off the leaves must be some sort of sap. This wasn't the only change. Small villages started popping up. All were walled off and I couldn't imagine more than 100 people lived in them. We flew near one to check it out and the people turned out to be some strange hybrid creature between a goat and a spider. Those were the closest analogues I could think of to describe them. They had short horns that hurled along their heads and most sported a mane of silver hair. It was mainly the shape of the pupils that made me think of a goat. Not that they were covered in hair or looked like a satyr. They had 2 arms and 3 fingers, or 2 fingers and a thumb. It was hard to tell since the digits were all almost the same length. The spider part came in at the lower portion of the body. They had 6 legs, with what I assumed were hooves and a small thorax where a tail might be on a beastkin. I had also witnessed a gathering of females, weaving cloth from the silk the thorax extruded. I was tempted to go down there to see if I could trade, but I didn't want to spook the natives. Plus those eyes gave me the willies. We decided to continue on without stopping. While Fiona had found a few dungeons during our stops at night, they were all pretty low level. The highest reaching level 7. We could always check them on the way back to see if we could get a first clear bonus, but otherwise, they weren't worth the effort. There had been no sightings of another horde dungeon, but I wasn't too surprised. From what Fiona told me, they were extremely rare. And having been in 2 put me above 99% of the population on her planet. Still, I held out hope for a third. More and more small towns started popping up the farther north we went. There were even roads and travelers spotted moving northeast and west along a dirt trail. My guess was a real road hadn't had time to be established to wherever they were heading. That did give us a good indicator that there should be a large trading town coming up. I was proven correct an hour later as a large town, nestled against the bottom slope of the mountain, came into view in the distance. I decided to set the fortress down in a valley between 2 rocky juts from the mountain. It was easily an hour's ride on Bella to the town, but I didn't want to cause an uproar until I got an idea of who the natives were. "You two ready to say hi to the locals?" "Yes," Ska crooned, stretching his stiff muscles from the 3-day journey. "Want me to scout ahead?" Fiona asked. "No, for the moment stick with us. Once we get closer to the town, check it out from above and come back. I can't imagine a booming trading town like this to turn anyone away." I popped Bella out of her cage. She had fully recovered from her ordeal with those despicable dwarves and spent most of her time in the spare storage room while we flew. At nights she hunted around the fortress, sometimes with Ska. The two had finally come to an unspoken agreement, which was good because it had been annoying having them snap and growl at each other all the time. Ska was able to keep up without issue as I wasn't pushing Bella to her limit. Thankfully the Grimalkin didn't suffer from prolonged running as cheetahs did. Half an hour later we arrived on the road heading into the town. The walled-off portion was even larger than Houston. It was surprising seeing this many people so far from where any major town had been prior to the system. We passed dozens of wagons and just people walking as we neared the town. Most were openly armed and armored as they rode by. There was no open hostility, but people did look our way as we passed. I think it had to do more with me riding a war mount than anything. Or maybe it was the fact that I was human, since not a single traveler I had seen had been human so far. I spotted at least 6 different beastkin varieties and another 4 humanoids like elves and dwarves, although I didn't know what their race was. I decided not to be rude by using identify. We had enough people mad at us for the moment. When we were 10 minutes from the wall, Fiona whispered in my ear that she would be back after checking out the town. "Many beastkin," you think there may be Grimalkin? Ska asked in hope. Are your people plentiful? No, he said dejectedly. There may be other feline beastkin. That seemed to perk him up a bit. Town seems fine, plenty of guards. I don't recognize the flag, but that isn't too surprising. I gave a small nod so Fiona would know I heard her. We rode through the massive gate. The entrance was large enough to fit 4 cars side by side, and it was packed with people coming and going. A group of guards was collecting a toll, and eventually one approached us. Welcome to West Exit. Is this your first time here? Yes, I replied in confusion. Wait, the town is called West Exit. Yes. It is the west exit to the tunnel through the mountain, and the mohe that created the tunnel gave the town its name. Since this is your first time here, please take this token. It allows one passage through the mountain. Also, please stop by the pavilion after you enter the town and read the rules that are posted. I didn't get to ask any more questions as he waved us ahead. The tunnel opened up 20 meters later into a massive open area. Some temporary shops had been set up along the edges, but it looked like nobody was allowed to set up near the center. The town was a melting pot of hundreds of different species. It reminded me a lot of the bazaar, if on a smaller scale. I even saw a few humans, even a few Earth humans. The clothing usually gave them away. Although, it seemed like humans were quite the minority in this area of the world. We made our way over to the posted sign after I stored Bella. The rules were simple. No fighting, no stealing, no slavery, and no rape. They also only listed one punishment for those crimes: death. So, you want to check out the town, or see this tunnel through the mountain? I asked Ska. Unfortunately, his eyes kept darting about and his tail was twitching erratically. He hadn't heard a word I had spoken. When I followed his gaze, I had to groan. There was indeed plenty of female feline kin in the city. I had to grab him by the straps around his torso as he tried to bolt toward one pack that looked like Persian cats, only 6 feet tall and with a mane of lustrous white hair. I could see Ska's attraction. But I didn't feel like having to deal with a horny cat or flee the city just as we arrived. I dragged the reluctant Grimalkin along as we looked for a place to stay. I did note, however, that Ska drew the gazes of more than one female. I didn't think he would have any issue finding a willing companion while we were here. I also saw a few gazes sent my way, but I ignored them. I wasn't interested in finding a bed partner, human or otherwise. Why are we staying in this town? Fiona asked once we entered the room we rented. I want to get a feel for the town, see if this is a viable travel route or if there is a way over the mountains farther north. It just seems like our time could be better spent leveling, Fiona grumbled. I waved off her concern. We have plenty of time. Yes, town is good, I say we stay, Ska said, his agitation bringing about his old stilted speech pattern. Martin had spent a fair bit of time getting him to speak properly, but when he was stressed or agitated he reverted to his old ways. It made reading his mood easy. He had been like this since I dragged him away from those females. I assumed it was some beastkin physiology at play, giving him a one-track mind. Or maybe their species went into heat like normal cats. God forbid I had to listen to those sorts of sounds all night long. Fine, Ska, you can go. Just stay out of trouble and obey the town rules. I mean it, I said, giving him my most intimidating stare. He nodded as he rushed out of the room. We spent a couple of days exploring the town and meeting the locals. I talked with a group of merchants getting ready to head through the tunnel. The town on the far side of the mountain was aptly named East Exit. The mohe are very literal in their naming sense. The trip was longer than expected, 2 full weeks. Why such a long journey? I asked, knowing it shouldn't take more than a few days. The mohe don't dig straight tunnels. They like to follow softer stone, as they call it, usually veins of minerals or ore, the caravan leader stated. He was a half-dwarf with a shaved head and Fu Manchu mustache. I thought about exploring these caves and checking out the other city. It wasn't like the 3 of us had any pressing business. The remaining black dragons were in Chicago, according to Michael. And they would have no way to track my movements anymore. Plus there may be strong creatures or even dungeons within the depths. That was one of the deciding factors in my choice to go. The other was the token we were given. At first, I thought it just allowed us passage through the tunnel. But it turns out it was a return token. After breaking it, it would teleport the holder back to West Exit Square. I thought that was a rather extravagant investment until I learned that the token was just a marker, and the actual enchantment that did all the work was inlaid into the square. I tried to learn the identity of this master enchanter, but whoever it was kept a tight secret. After meeting Lord Vic, I can't blame them for wanting to keep this quiet. It seemed to me that the Enchanter Guild didn't appreciate rogue enchanters. As for the tunnels, I learned quite a bit. There were all sorts of nasty creatures and natural caverns that the Mohe or Molken had dug into on their trek through the mountain. No mention of dungeons though. Not that I was surprised. A dungeon could be a strategic investment if utilized properly. The Mohe's natural gift at earth magic allowed them to tunnel through solid rock even faster than dwarves. But as the caravan leader stated, they preferred to follow ore. They also seemed to have some sort of sixth sense about open caverns and other underground oddities. It would be a few more days before the caravan set out, so I walked around town until I found what I was looking for. "Hey, you," I yelled, waving over a startled man in a weather-beaten baseball cap. "Man, I missed my baseball cap." The man hesitantly walked over. Yes. "You're a local, from Earth, right?" "Yes," the man asked quizzically. "Sorry, I'm Paul. I was originally from Wisconsin when everything went to shit, just trying to see how the rest of the world fared." "What state you from?" "Oh, a fellow Midwesterner. I was in central Iowa, on my family farm when everything changed. Gotta say, it was a bit hard coping at first, but we toughed it out. What with the beasts and the other worlders running around." I nodded along at his story, really only interested in how the mountain looked in the north. "After my family was killed by a pack of beasts, I ran. I tried heading east. I had extended family in Indiana, but the spine of the world blocked my path. Eventually, I ended up in West Exit." "Sorry for your loss," I replied sincerely. After that revelation, the conversation started petering out. The man eventually nodded and walked off, lost in his dredged-up memories. I felt bad for bringing it up, but I could probably point to 9 out of 10 people and get a similar story of people dying around them. I sighed after talking with a few more people. I had been right, the stories were pretty much the same. Almost everyone lost someone. Then they tried to find any connection to the old world, ending up here. When I asked why they didn't just join a caravan and go through the tunnel, they looked dejected. Turns out the caravans didn't want a bunch of non-combatants along for a ride. And they wouldn't just hire an unknown. They only hired Ska and me because of our high levels. Most civilians in the city couldn't even boast getting to level 5. So the people were essentially stuck in town until the city watch threw them out to fend for themselves, or they found a job that paid, allowing them to rent a room. It was cold and ruthless, but that was what the world was now. You couldn't expect to sit safely behind a wall and not contribute to the city in some way, shape, or form. The information the farmer provided led me to believe the mountain stretched all the way into Canada. It was hard to believe a mountain range of that magnitude didn't have any way to pass through it, but the three of us hadn't found any, and it sounded like neither had anyone coming from the north. Going by the general location of the mountain, it followed a similar path that the Mississippi River once followed. This didn't seem like a coincidence, and it made me wonder what happened to the massive river. I knew it didn't exit out into the ocean anymore. The area where it should have exited was a vast desert. I would have to talk to Martin when I returned to Houston. Setting up an exclusive shipping route seemed like a highly profitable venture, considering that may be one of the only other ways around the mountains. With a little work, I could convert a smaller barge into a hovering ferry. It would be much safer and much faster, even if the merchants were forced to travel south, then back north. It was something to think about as I walked to join the caravan. "We leave in 10 minutes for Fort No Home," one of the caravan leaders yelled. "Make sure you are geared up and ready, and keep your eyes open as soon as we enter the cavern." I was not at the front, no, I was near the middle, essentially used as a personal bodyguard for a rich merchant. I had a little mental chuckle thinking about this man as being rich. The fortress probably held more value than his entire wares. Even my armor and weapon were worth more than most of the stuff I had seen the merchants carting about. I was surprised to see that few if any had spatial bags or rings. Most had grown up in poor worlds. They had access to the bazaar but no means to pay the town fees to enter. Now they risked it all to reach a bazaar to sell their goods. They could sell the items in town, but they would fetch far less on Earth since most people didn't have the credits that established traders could bring to the table. Then there was the fact that most of the stuff they were selling was new. Beast parts and strange plants that had not been seen before. Then there was always the old tech, lying around. One trader had a cart full of old computers, tablets, and cell phones. Even though the items didn't work, he was hoping to strike it rich. I tried helping out, telling them of the bazaar in Houston, but they were dead set on selling their wares at the one in East Exit. I learned the city used to have another name, Nashville. So at least I had a good idea where we would come out. The caravan didn't encounter the first attack until we exited the tunnel into the valley, heading for Fort No Home. A large flock of angry-looking birds flew down and attacked anything that moved. After a 10-minute fight, the surviving birds flew away while squawking angrily. The creatures were low-level, but there were hundreds of them. One unlucky merchant had been severely wounded during the encounter, but his son had been close by and was able to get him healing in time. I realized this was probably the most normal thing I had done in months. Simple adventuring. No running from some demented slaver, no fighting for my life against fanatics, or trying to survive in a desert. It was almost enough to get me to forget I had another lunatic trying to track me down, almost. Fort No Home turned out to just be 4 tall rock walls with an entrance on one end and an exit on the other. It was situated a couple of 100 meters down the valley from where we exited the first tunnel. I see it lives up to its name, I replied glumly, knowing sleeping on the ground would suck. It isn't much, the merchant beside me said, but it is a safe place to spend the night. I simply nodded in reply, not in much of a mood to talk. 2 days of walking through dark tunnels and I didn't even get to fight the stupid birds, left me a bit grouchy. The thick gates to No Home opened as we approached. The fort was large enough to house 3 times our number, but there wasn't so much as a building or room to speak of inside the walls. The walls had covered towers for the guards, but that was all. There was also a fee, charged to everyone who entered. If it was like this the entire trip, I doubted many merchants would have credits left by the time they made it through. It really was an all-or-nothing gamble for them. Chapter 110, Edge of Darkness. We set out the next day, rested as well as could be expected. Our next stop was in 3 days. 2 of those were just getting through this valley to the next tunnel entrance. The trail wound down the steep cliffs, crossing a small stream, only to wind back up and through a high pass on the other side. I noticed the peaks inside the spine of the world were not quite as tall as the surrounding peaks. It made me think of 2 tectonic plates slamming together, but instead of one going up and the other going down, they both just said fuck it, let's head for the clouds. I knew plates slamming together could cause mountains, but usually one of them won out, or at least it wasn't this extreme. Most of the peaks on the spine were tens of thousands of feet high. Some were probably taller than Mount Everest. I was pretty sure this was abnormal, but then again, what was considered normal anymore? Late on the second day, we entered the next tunnel. It was located halfway up a small peak. It wasn't as wide as the first tunnel and the caravan was forced to travel single file. We soon encountered the next monsters. Slimes dripped from the tall ceiling, landing on people, carts, and the floor. These weren't the same kind of slimes I had battled in the church. Umbral slime level 8. My staff whipped out, slapping a slime against the wall. I could barely even see the creatures due to the low light and their ability to blend in with the darkness. I imbued my staff with fire and it seemed to help, but these things weren't as weak to fire as the base slimes were. Still, they were only level 8. I looked around to see if anyone needed help. I spotted Ska, flitting about and slicing the creatures apart with little effort. It seemed like piercing or slashing attacks were the optimal counter to the creatures. One merchant cart was overrun, and before anyone could get to them, the man broke his token and fled back to West Exit, leaving his cart behind. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, but the cart was blocking the remaining third of the caravan. Stick close, I gotta go deal with an issue, I said to the man I was set to guard. I made my way to the abandoned cart, destroying any slime that got within my reach. A few fireballs, from the limited casters, flew into the ceiling, burning away any more slime. The cart was piled with animal pelts, but I simply touched it and the entire thing vanished into my ring. It did take up a significant portion of the room, but it was fine. The rest of the guards cleaned up the remaining enemies and we got back to moving along. The cave opened up, looking over an eerie luminescent green lake. The surface was dead still and we made sure to keep as far from the edge of the water as possible. Still, a few creatures burst from the placid waters, intent on seizing a meal. They looked like albino crocodiles with the head of a deep-sea anglerfish. Garlock Lurker level 12. The 12-foot-long creatures had some weird power. When you looked at their eyes it was almost as if you were paralyzed. But my buffs protected most of the people. One unfortunate woman was grabbed without so much as a twitch in self-defense. I was too far away to save her as the creature quickly fled into the water, disappearing below the surface with its prize. These ambush predators were pissing me off and I let out a shockwave that tore one of the beasts apart. We managed to drive off the remaining creatures before anyone else was dragged into the water. I could hear the man crying over his dead wife, but he was quickly quieted by a few of the other guards before we moved on. Sound carried in the underground and we didn't want to bring down even more enemies on us. The remaining part of the day went by quietly. We entered into a vast open cleft and made our way down to the next fort. Fort Edge of Darkness stood at the very edge of this rent in the mountain. Just looking at the steep drop and the endless dark below gave me the heebie-jeebies. Somehow the Mohe had constructed a rope bridge across the natural barrier. But I was more interested in the fortress. As we approached, a ball of white light flew from the fort, illuminating the area and a sea of creatures that was boiling up from the crack. The area around the fortress lit up with spells and the sounds of battle as our caravan ground to a halt and everyone looked on nervously. Thankfully, the creatures from the darkness only seemed interested in the fort. After 10 minutes of intense battle, everything went quiet. Everyone, hurry up, we don't want to be caught out here if another wave comes. That was enough to get everyone pushing forward as fast as possible. We made it to the walls and the gate opened, letting us in. The thick stone walls had dozens of signs of battle marred into them. Large rents from claws covered most of the outer surface. Dead creatures that looked like some sort of bug covered the entire ground around the fort. Move off to the side and don't block any defenders. Hurry up. We closed the gate in 2 minutes, one of the guards inside yelled. I didn't know if the man was prophetic or this was a normal occurrence, but less than 30 seconds after the gate closed, I could hear the scrapping of rock as another flare lit up the darkness. The fort guardians knew their business though, and soon spells impacted the creatures as they tried to fight their way through the walls. You folks picked a hell of a time to travel the dark road. It's swarm season for the Dugon. I assumed the Dugon were the bugs. Most of the time they are harmless and perfectly fine remaining in their caves unless provoked. But they turn crazed during the swarm. This swarm reminded me a lot of the Horde dungeons and I wondered if maybe there was a dungeon below. I quietly made my way over to a corner out of sight and whispered to Fiona. Can you check to see if these creatures are coming from a Horde dungeon? Yes, she whispered back. After she acknowledged me, I moved back to the group. It took over an hour for Fiona to return. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and once again I moved off to a secluded spot. There is a Horde dungeon down there, but I don't know how you would even get to it. There have to be close to 1 million of these Dugon outside the entrance. The dungeon itself is only level 13. Maybe we can come back after the swarm is dealt with. Thanks, I added quietly. When I returned, I looked for one of the guards. Excuse me. Hey, the Mohe said, stopping in front of me. How long does a swarm season usually last? It depends on the size of the hive. Anywhere from a week to a month if the hive numbers in the hundreds of thousands. I winced internally at that, knowing the hive was even larger than the defenders' estimates. Thanks, how long has it been going on? Oh, a few days. Seems to be a decently large hive, only the drones have come up so far. I nodded in thanks. I wasn't planning on sticking around for a few months until the hive exhausted itself against the defenders, assuming they lasted that long. Nor was I willing to fight off 1 million bugs just to get a few stat points. I decided not to even mention it to Ska, knowing that crazy bastard he would want to test his luck. The night was awful and sleep eluded me as every few hours the fort would come alive to kill off another wave of the Dugon. It seemed like the Mohe were familiar with the creatures as they dealt with them very efficiently. Even the corpses were shoved into the darkness by earth mages. The next day the nervous caravan waited while the sounds of battle raged outside the walls. As soon as it went quiet, the gate by the bridge opened. Good luck, the guard said as the remaining members of the caravan rushed across the bridge. A quarter of the caravan fled during the night, breaking their tokens and leaving everything behind. The Mohe of the fort claimed the abandoned property as recompense and nobody disputed the claim. Once again we entered a dark tunnel and I was beginning to wonder if this trip was even worth it. I certainly planned on giving the residents of Earth a better way to bypass this mountain chain. Not being able to claim the Horde dungeon was a bummer, but it would be gone before the swarm disappeared and we made our way back in this direction, seeing as Fiona activated it by going inside. It was probably for the best. This way the Mohe wouldn't be overrun or exhausted by having to continuously fight for months on end as the dungeon poured more and more creatures out. The tunnel abruptly ended after less than an hour of travel, opening into a massive cave filled with glowing moss and all types of plants. The cave was so large that clouds concealed the ceiling and a light but steady drip of rain fell from above. If it wasn't for the horrifying creatures and possibly deadly plants, I might be overwhelmed with awe at the sight. I couldn't even see the far end of the cavern as it faded into the distance. A path had been cleared through the dense vegetation though. Cautiously the caravan moved forward. Everyone had witnessed the horrors that lurked down here and nobody wanted to be the next victim. Ska turned out to be the best asset we had. He spotted and dealt with over a dozen dangerous critters before they could even make it to the caravan. I was a bit jealous and annoyed, but I quickly calmed down. The creatures were between level 10 and 12. I doubted if I cleared this entire cavern that I would level from it, so I let him do his thing. I also let the fire mages deal with the dangerous plant life along our path. They could benefit from the experience more than me. The trip through the expansive cavern took a full day. If I had to guess, the cavern extended 20 miles. It wasn't a straight shot east though. Instead, it curved north about a quarter of the way through. All of the fighting allowed Ska to hit level 18 though, so that was at least one positive. The next fortress we arrived at was called Fort Blue Lake. As always, aptly named for the neon blue lake it faced. We had to steer clear of the lake as toxic mist wafted up from it. Thankfully there was no breeze underground to send the toxic cloud our way. Still, most of the caravan couldn't wait to get far away from the area. Halfway through the journey, we arrived at midpoint. A town situated in another cavern. This one wasn't nearly as large as the forest one though. We entered through the gate, greeted by the sight of thousands of mohe, going about their daily lives. Another caravan was getting ready to exit and head east, and they watched our weary faces, giving us solemn nods as we passed. Everyone was dead tired from the first leg of the trip and we would be recuperating in the town for 2 days. It would add time to the journey, but nobody could keep going if we didn't stop for rest. Even Ska and I were exhausted by this point. Meet at the east gate in 2 days or be left behind, the caravan leader stated flatly. A few people grumbled. But they knew, to be left behind was to lose everything.